Welcome to Rebuild Fellowship. My name is Dr. Kimani Gadere. I am the teaching pastor here at Rebuild Fellowship. And we are glad that you decide to take this time to share the Word of God with us. We endeavor to teach or to pass on to you God's timeless and timely truth for our times, because God's word is both inspired to deal with our past, our present, and our future. And I trust that as we take time in the word, we will help to clear away the bushes and the cobwebs, that you can see Jesus clearly and his demands for your life, for he has a good plan for your life. And my job always as a minister of the gospel is to make you see that wonderful plan and get off from your seat of fear and defeat and begin to follow the Lord into the area of victory, because he has designed you for greatness and for victory. So today we'll be looking at an Old Testament book, Judges chapter 7 from verses 1 to verse 15, and in a way to try and make this passage maybe resonate with you, we will call it following Jesus with too much stuff. That may not sound to you like a very chic or very appropriate message, but I want you to think of the times we are in when you are bombarded by constant barrage of bad news and you are being told things are going to hell in a handbasket. The natural reaction or response is to begin to hoard, whether it is useless goods like napkins, toilet paper, paper towels. Things you can't even eat. But somehow when we panic, we purchase all these irrational things because we think we don't have enough. And then, as usual, when Jesus comes in outside looking in, he says to us, you have too much stuff. And we are saying to him, are you kidding me? Do you see how little I have and how much I need, so that if this COVID thing continues, I may survive? But Jesus says something different to you. Let me read from Judges chapter 7, verses 1 to verse 15. Gideon, or Jerubbaal, and all the troops who were with him got up early and camped beside the springs of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to them, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, my own strength has saved me. Now announce to the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave out to Gilead. So 20,000 of the troops turned back, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many troops. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you. If I say to you, this one shall go, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go. So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels to drink. The number of those who lapped with their hands to their mouth were 300 men, and all the rest of the troops knelt to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you, but everyone else is to go home. So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept 300 troops who took the provisions and their trumpets, and the camp of Midian was down in the valley below him. That night the Lord said to him, get up and attack the camp, for I have handed it to you. But if you are afraid to attack the camp, go down with Purah your servant. Listen to what they say, then you'll be encouraged to attack the camp. So he went down with Purah his servant to the outpost of the troops who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the Kedemites had settled down in the valley like a swarm of locusts. Their camels were as innumerable as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, there was a man telling his friend about a dream. He said, "Listen, I had a dream about a loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp, struck a tent, and it fell. The loaf turned the tent upside down, and so it collapsed." And his friend said, "This is nothing less than the God of Gideon, the son of Joash, the Israelite. God has handed the entire Midianite camp over to him." When Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down in worship. He returned to Israel's camp and said, "Get up, for the Lord has handed the Midianite camp over to you." You see, the angel of God had appeared to Gideon in chapter 6 when he had been threshing wheat in a wine press because he was so scared that the Midianites would come and grab his meager harvest. And the angel of God had challenged him to go and to begin to work out his design. In fact, God called him by name, Gideon, or soldier, or warrior, or farmer, mighty man, Gideon, go fight. Jesus called you to fight. Go fight. But no, he couldn't do that. And now, after going through a series of tests with God, can you, God, change this, please? Make it wet, make it dry, please. Finally, he decided this was God. And now, where we catch up with him, he has finally sublimated his own fear and he has decided, I am gonna go down fighting. So he goes and calls the people and tells them God has said we need to go fight. And 32,000 show up, and Gideon, while he is not thrilled, he is saying, at least we got a fighting chance. Unfortunately, God says to him, you have too many people. 32,000 people is too much. If I deliver you, you are going to be boasting. So tell them, whoever is fearful, go back home. And Gideon tells them that, and right away, 22,000 take off. And he's left with 10,000. Now, if he was having butterflies in his stomach, now he has a whole swarm of them, complete with locusts and termites and everything else, because now he knows we really don't have a chance. And God looks in and still says, you still have too much stuff. Let's go in and reduce. In fact, he says to him, because if I ask you to let go of them, you won't. Let me pick my own fighting warriors. Let me pick my own SEAL team number 6. Let me pick my own Rangers, the airborne, division. Let me pick my own team. And he goes and gives him this very strange test for warfare. And by the time Gideon is done, he has only 300 soldiers remaining. And God says to him, with the 300, we are going to conquer the land. So what happens? Gideon finds himself saying to God, I want to obey, I want to follow you, but I don't have enough. And God says, no, you have too much stuff. Ever been there? You see, one of the things that is becoming rather chic right now here in the West is really the idea of getting what is called a small house. Right now, small homes are very chic, they are very in. So the question is, here in California, when is too much? Do you want the mansion, the 20 bedroom, 6 bathroom, 4 swimming pools and a jacuzzi and a recording studio in your house? Or is this little house enough for you? You see, this is what Gideon was facing He was saying, I don't have too much. And God was telling him, do you realize even your small house is still better than how 90% of the world lives? You see, Jesus was calling Gideon to begin to take stock of where he was so that God would work with him. You see, the words of Jesus to the disciples were very clear. Jesus says to the crowd when they come to talk to him in Luke chapter 9, verse 23 to verse 424, Jesus says to the crowd, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. These are the ones who are saying we don't have enough. And Jesus is saying, even the little you have is getting in the way of service. And Jesus is saying to the Jews, to the disciples, if you're gonna be my follower, you have to give up your own way. You have to start thinking my way. If you hang on to your life your way, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and do things my way, he says you will save it. You see, that is where the disciples find themselves, and Jesus says to them, you do not know how much you have. You have too much, and until you give up your own way and go my way, you and I cannot work together. You see, there are 3 lessons that God is saying to Gideon, and there are those 3 lessons that may be very cogent, very germane, very relevant to where we are today. Perhaps when you're looking around and you're saying, do you know I am about to lose my job? Do you know I might lose my job? Do you know my family is having to adjust our spending habits? Do you know? And Jesus looks and says, I know where you are. You still have too much stuff because that is where your foundations are. Jesus says to Gideon through the word 3 things. You see, Gideon is at a time when they are going through a bad period. Judges encapsulate that whole time, describes it and summarizes it in 4 verses, that in those days Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. Judges 17 verse 6. In those days Israel had no king. Judges 18 verse 1. Now in those days Israel had no king. Judges 19 verse 1. Now in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. 21 verse 25. There was no leadership. There was no warfare. The people were living in bad times. And Jesus is saying to Gideon, even in these moments of fear, even in these moments when the enemy is upon you like a flood, you still have too much because you are still focused on what you can see. And so you are making decisions purely on safety, not any other reason. You are coming to Jesus for safety and security, not salvation, and not for him to be your sovereign. And Jesus says to them, don't you understand? Unless you give up your own way and take up my cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. And this is where we find ourselves, where now Gideon and his friends are. See, the Shephelah Valley, where they are having this fight, it's a beautiful, beautiful place in Israel. In fact, if you are on the Judean hills, if you look, straight to the west, what you see in the horizon would be the little hills, and down there the Mediterranean Sea. It's a beautiful place. They call it the Shephelah, or the valley, and that's the most beautiful. That's the most, if you will, productive part of Israel. But that's the place where the enemy have come and occupied and Gideon and his family, his friends, they have to go and face the enemy right there in the Shephelah, in the valley, because that's the only place where you can harvest. And when he gets there, God says to him, you have too many people. I want to begin to reduce them. He makes 3 points. And point number 1, from verses 1 to verse 5, he says to him, you have too much stuff. You have too many soldiers. In fact, he says to him in verse 2, the Lord says to Gideon, you have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to you, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, my own strength has covered me. In other words, God is saying, I want to work with you. I want to do stuff for you, but you have too much protection, too much safety, too much independence in your own capacity to solve your problems, that whatever I do, you will not give me the glory. He's saying to him, you have too many soldiers. 3 points. Your victory will bring pride. You will say, I did this. Your blessings will bring entitlement. I earned this and it is mine. And your life will be led by pride. I can do anything. Who needs God? And so verse 1 to verse 5 is God saying to him, you have too much stuff. Verse 6 to 8, he says to him, I don't want to use 32,000 because that pride would lead to death. I do not want to use the 10,000 because that would lead to infighting. I do not want to use these ones. I want to use 300. Faith allows the soldiers to trust God and stand. It is not the 32,000. What is the point here? He is saying, how do you trust God when you have too much stuff? Number 1, stop trusting what you can see. In fact, when it gets in the way, be prepared to move it out of the way. Some of us need to give away some stuff. I may have stuff in my garage that belongs to you. Come get it. I don't need it. But verse 2, the second lesson, he says, trust God's choice and provisions, not stuff. What is he talking about? He says to him, we will not use 32,000. We will not send the Airborne 101 parachute regiment. We will not send the 10,000. We will send 300. Why? Because the battle is not about numbers. The battle is not about your capacity. The battle is about what God is able to do. And the third lesson really that God says to him is, fearful but obedient faith in God, not stuff, leads to victory. Fearful but obedient faith in God and not our stuff leads to victory. One of my favorite basketball players of all time is they used to call him, I believe, Mark Boggs. And to see him guarding, he was all of 5 feet, I think, 5'5". To see him guarding guys who are 6'6", and basically they are teasing him. The lesson that he has taught me is the lesson that God is teaching Gideon. Small numbers can be easily eliminated. So you don't go there with any prideful brash acts. Small numbers can also be easily guided. There is no confusion in leadership or execution. Small numbers can easily bear the point or the advantage of surprise. Why? Because small numbers are able to come, and those who are looking for them, all they say is, oh, maybe this person cannot work. Small numbers cannot explain victory. There's no personal glory when God reveals his will and uses 300 people. What is the point here? God says, when you have a small group, you tend to listen to God more. You tend to have clarity of vision because you can't afford to lose anybody or anything. and you also cannot take your victory for granted. There is no personal glory in this whole thing. All you can say is, God has led me. And when God has led you, then you find yourself having the capacity of less. Sometimes less is more, and we don't always take that. There is an American general, former Air Force, John Boyd, who would teach in the Air Force, flight academy, or when they're learning how to do dogfights with their fancy planes. He would teach them that the best way to engage your opponent in a dogfight, he created what is called the OODA loop, where they talk of observe, orient, decide, and act. And one of the things he says, and it's applied to even when you're playing basketball, is when you're playing a larger opponent, like when you have someone like Marcus Boggs really playing a taller opponent. Call that Shaquille O'Neal, call that, any of the big boys who are in the NBA. A tactical level example can be found on the basketball court, where a player takes possession of the ball and must get past an opponent who is taller or faster. What does that mean? You are facing a giant. You cannot do a straight dribble because you won't succeed. So you must engage in a series of rapid and elaborate body movements designed to confuse the opponent and deny him the ability to take advantage of his superior size or speed. What is this saying? It is basic that God will say to Gideon, all warfare is deceptive. We are not fighting an enemy the way he expects. We are fighting based on our reality, and the enemy doesn't know that. One of the more, famous books on warfare is a small book called The Art of War by Sun Yat-sen, a Chinese general, and he writes, all warfare is based on deception. Therefore, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When we are far away, we must make the enemy believe we are near. What is that? You find that exactly with our Gideon. When they show up, the enemy is not sure whether they are here or there, because we are reminded warfare is not about telling your enemy where you are or what you are doing. Warfare is always about confusing the enemy because you have one agenda. What's your agenda? Is victory. Remember, we are in a world where the Bible says we have been sent as sheep to walk among wolves. They bite. They eat little sheep like us. They will chew you, regurgitate you, and chew you again. And so we are called to go, not to fight like people who are fighting each other, but we are called to go aware that God is calling us to fight with wisdom. And Gideon is told, don't take 32,000, don't take 10,000, take just 10. Take just 300. Why? Because God says, I can use those, and I can use those to create confusion, to create inactivity, to befuddle, to confuse the other ones. Why? Because they are expecting a larger group. They say 300, they are not sure what to do, but God says, I will use the 300. I will come with a different strategy. We will win, we will win, we will win. And so we find ourselves making this statement. You see, when you have God as your commander, you bring a spiritual army unseen by the others, and therefore you have an unseen spiritual advantage. Let me make a statement again. When you have God as your commander, you bring a spiritual army unseen by the others, and therefore you have an unseen advantage. You see, when Israel was being attacked by King Sennacherib, a king of Assyria, Hezekiah, the king, went before the people and made this great statement in 2 Chronicles 32, verse 7 to 8. He says to them, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria and all the horde that is with him. Why? For they are more with us than with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And the people took confidence from the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. Again, he is saying to them, with him is an army of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. He is saying to them, as you face your giants, there is an unseen force behind you. God is saying this is not just about strategy, it's not about numbers, it's not about resources, it's not about what you think or what you perceive. It's about what God is able to say to us. It's about God saying, no, you will listen to me. If you want to fight to win, we will fight my way. If you want to be fighting this battle for the next 300 years, then keep doing things your way. And God says to them, you do it my way. And Hezekiah, the king of Judah, tells the people, do not be afraid or dismayed before this king. Why? Because with him is the arm of flesh. Yes, he has numbers. His defense, his confidence is in the numbers, but we are bringing the unseen army, the God of the universe, who knows every trick in the book, every strategy, every possible move that every other army has ever used. And God says to Gideon, when you have too much stuff, that stuff gets in the way. So, do you think COVID is telling you how much you rely on stuff? Is COVID being God's short-term prophet to tell you where you are and what you need to be having this conversation about? What will you do with COVID? For some of us, we are refreshing our lives, we are relearning skills. You can rethink your priorities or wait for the next epidemic. It will come until this thing clears the cycle of most viruses. It will come again. I think that the important lesson here is to redeem the time and to live out your design. What am I talking about? You see, a disease is not always a punishment from God. Some diseases come simply because we are doing things wrong. You see, one of the weird stories to come out of Europe is that in 1227 AD, one of the men who became Pope, he became Pope Gregory the Ninth. And for whatever reason, the literature of the day indicates that he gave a command, something about black cats being used by the devil. And so people began to really decimate cats. 1227 AD, mark that date. That's the beginning of the 13th century. The 13th century AD, when Europe went through that crazy binge of killing the black cat and every other cat because they were handmaidens of the devil. Come 13th century, basically, 20 years later, the bubonic plague comes and hits all of Europe and kills, we are told, depending on who you ask, between 50 to 200 million people. Why? Because the rats overtook the land. Yes, we are told the virus of the bubonic plague, I think Yersinia pestis, we are told it came from the Far East along the Silk Road, but it found a Europe where the natural controls of mice and rats had been eradicated by some foolish dogma, foolish decree, and yes, chaos came in. So yes, COVID has come and is doing a whole lot of mess because we as a people have learned to depend on medicine, not common sense, not food, not taking care of ourselves, not God. It's always, if I get sick, there's a pill for it. And comes COVID and we find ourselves with this mess. So what are you doing with COVID? My prayer is that this will be a moment when God shows you or your over-reliance on the stuff that you have. And if you are wise like Gideon, when God begins to pare down, to remove certain things, I have found that there are things I don't really need. My eating habits have had to shift, and I find myself when I'm working from home that I really am not hungry as I thought I was. And believe it or not, even my capacity or my habits of going to the gym after work, it wasn't always necessary. And I find myself now many times working out from home refresh your life. Why? Because God says to you, as he said to Gideon, I can work with you, but when you have too much stuff, they get in the way. So my prayer for you is that even in this moment, only you can honestly go before God and decide what is getting in the way. A lot of the discussions that are going on, whether we are going to support Black Lives Matter or the police, you see, that's a false dichotomy. Can we support both? Can we be for justice and for fairness? Can we stand out and say that it is wrong to kill a human being on national TV? Can we flat out say that? Can we also flat out say that we want to protect our police? Is it possible? That the answer is not either or? But you see, fear drives us to one extreme or the other. And God says you still have too much hope and dependence on your political power, on your form of government, on your political party, and the chaos continues to be. Remember that story out of Europe, though many swear it apocryphal, that Pope Gregory IX orders the decimation of cats because they are the devil's handmaiden, and within 30 to 40 years, the European bubonic plague comes and decimates all of England because the rats are having a heyday. And there are many reasons you can talk about how Europe was going through a weather change and where there are many plants and all this stuff. But the decision to eradicate natural pest controllers had implications not just for the people out there who did that, but for 50 to 200 million people. So what is the point? Redeem the time and live out your design. God has called you and has placed you in a place that only you can make a difference. When you hear statements being made that are racist or that are discriminatory, whether it's against a class of people or a race or even a gender, then you have the mandate to speak out. You know why? Pastor Martin Niemöller, and I love to quote him, reminds me again and again, because he spent so many years jailed by Hitler, and when he came out he said, I owe the Jews an apology. His words, he said, when the Gestapo came to arrest the trade unionists, I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. When they came to arrest the communists, I did not speak out because I was not a communist. When they came to arrest the Jews, I did not speak out because I'm not a Jew. When they came to arrest me, no one spoke out for me, for all the ones who could have done had been arrested, and the people had been conditioned to others being jailed without due process. If we don't speak against injustice, it will not go away. It will come back to haunt us. But if we take our rightful place and begin to listen to what God is saying, He will speak through our fear. He will reduce our over-reliance on stuff and use whatever little that remains to accomplish His purpose for His glory. And so until next time, when we gather one more time to hear God's word, to hear what Jesus wants to do in your life. He has died for you and rose again. That part is done. But you gotta get your head in the game. You gotta get out of this capacity of being scared by numbers and peoples and agendas and pundits and politicians and everybody else. You gotta get your head in the game that Jesus has saved you, has kept you alive this far because He has a plan for your life. You've been designed to accomplish more, and if you don't do that, this thing is not gonna go away. So until next time, when we meet one more time to hear God's timely and timeless truth for our times, I am Dr. Kimani Gadere, wishing all of you a very, very happy Father's Day. Those of you who are out there, man, you are under a barrage of attack, but you'll be fine. God has given you capacity and design. You'll be fine. Lead your families to begin to take a stand for the oppressed. And when you do that, the God of Gideon will lead you and grant you victory. And when they write the history of this country, your name will not be in the footprints. You will get a page, for you would have stood for God's oppressed. Thank you, and God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.